to have a look at making fritters. Now, fritters are usually items that are fried. They can be coated in a batter and deep fat fried, but equally they can be shallow or dry fried on the hob. Usually what happens is an egg is a binding agent. The heat applied when putting it on the hob causes the egg to coagulate and hold the cake together. A good example of a fritter would be something like a fish cake. We can also make these with chopped up and blended vegetables, corn. Other things that we're going to use today is couscous. So all of these things hold together as a small cake that can be presented is either as part of a main meal, or they could be used as a starter, or as we discussed the other day in the lesson, an amuse-bouche, which means like a little taster to get you excited for what's coming next and for the rest of the meal. Now we have couscous, an egg, tomato, some stock, spring onions, feta cheese and some yoghurt. So any natural yoghurt, today I've got total, but any natural yoghurt will work well. Also with the natural yoghurt, spring onion and cucumber, adding in some garlic. I will also make a tzatziki dip to go alongside this, so when I plate up the dish I have something to serve it with, because fritters can be a little dry if served just on their own. So let's get started. First, weigh out the couscous. I think we wanted 80 grams. If you overdo it, just take a little bit back out. With that, you're going to need your stock. So this stock cube makes 190 millilitres, and we only need 100, but so fill it up to the 190 and then pour in just over half. Make sure all the stock is dissolved before you start pouring it over the couscous. Give this couscous a stir and then leave it with a plate over the top just to not lose all the steam until you're ready for it. Now with the tomato, score it slightly through the skin. But then to make it easier to peel, we're going to pour boiling hot water over it for about 30 seconds. We don't want it any longer than that because we don't want to soften the tomato too much, because we want to be able to dice it. So after 30 seconds, remove it from the hot water. Dry it, any excess water, and then hopefully the skin should peel off fairly easily. Once you're ready, you'll be able to use the bridge and claw method to dice this. Before you dice, you need to remove the seeds from the inside, because that would change the consistency of the fritters, because you'd be adding in more liquid. Now we want these nice and small because our fritters are going to be nice and small, so we need to dice these up fairly tinily. Next, we're going to slice up the feta cheese. The recipe calls for it to be diced into 1 centimetre cubes. This could be done smaller, but it's quite a crumbly cheese, and when you start to stir it later, it will break up into smaller pieces. Next, we're going to dice up the spring onions. Again, we want them nice and small because we want to make small amuse-bouche fritters. So you don't want anything too chunky in there because it would cause the fritter to fall apart. Add that also to the bowl. Next, you want to break your egg and whisk it up. The recipe calls for half an egg, always a bit awkward. So whisk it well and then pour in approximately half an egg. You can just eyeball it. Finally, you want to add your yoghurt. So we want to add 1 tablespoon. So using a measuring spoon, I'm going to take in 1 tablespoon. The different consistencies of yoghurt would be easier to spoon than others. Once it's all in there, you want to stir it until the mixture is combined and all the ingredients are distributed evenly. At this point also you can break up some of the larger cubes of feta if you want to spread them out throughout. Add some seasoning. So I'm using some pepper. There was plenty of salt in the stock, so I'm not adding any additional salt. Here I have 2 potato scoops. One's very small. These are for my tiny amuse-bouche fritters. These would be great as an appetizer. The larger scoop would be more suitable for either a main course or as a starter. You want to make sure it's fairly well packed in because you don't want these falling apart when you put them in the frying pan to fry. Now, if you don't have scoops like these, you can use any sort of scoop, a measuring spoon, to measure them out evenly. Then we move on to the frying. Now I'm just waiting for a change in colour, a golden brown colour. This will happen really quickly. Oil conducts heat much quicker than water does, and so you have to make sure you don't wander off or leave your hob unattended because these will cook quickly. As soon as they're a nice golden brown colour, you can turn them over. If you're not sure, flip them over. You can always turn them back. Now I keep tilting the frying pan because some frying pans, as they get hotter in the middle, they can dome up a little bit, so the oil falls to the sides and not in the middle. So I'm wanting to make sure that stays evenly around the fritters. Before I start cooking the next set, I might add some additional oil, because obviously some of it does get soaked up by the fritters being cooked. I also have to wait for this to reach the correct temperature before I start cooking. Another way to check to see if the oil is hot enough is to put a little bit of the food that you're cooking in there. So either a tiny piece of bread, or in this case a tiny bit of spring onion. As we can see, that starts to bubble up straight away, so we know the oil is ready to use. So we do know the oil is ready to use. I would remove that before I put my fritters in, because again, you don't want that sort of burnt taste in the oil. So here are the completed fritters. So you've got the large ones here that could be used, maybe 2 as a starter, and these are the amuse-bouche that could be given out as a little appetizer at the beginning of a party. So now it's down to you how you would like to present and plate them up. Have fun. So for the dip, we're going to come back and we're going to slice up our spring onions nice and small. We're going to grate our cucumber, and then we will mix that all together with I've got Total, but any of the natural yogurts would do, with some garlic seasoning and a tiny bit of olive oil. Now, As you can see, quite a lot of liquid comes out when you grate a cucumber, so that now has to be drained. You don't want that liquid going in your dip because it will change the consistency of the dip. You want to try and keep though as much of the cucumber as possible. Now I like keeping the skin on. Equally though, you could peel that off beforehand if you so wished. Last few bits. It's amazing how much liquid comes out. I'm now going to clean up my workspace. So for the final dip, I'm going to put down scales. Let's grab a glass jug, zero it. And I want 200 to 250 grams of my yogurt. Now, different yogurts, this one is quite thick and solid. Others will be runnier. It doesn't matter, it's a personal preference. Quark works very well for a dip. If you weren't being quite as healthy, because these are all 0% fat and don't have any added sugar, you could also look at sour cream or maybe do a 50-50 split between the two, and it just creates a slightly different texture, slightly different flavour. So weigh that in, then nearly there. 200, yeah, we'll go about 230, should be plenty. So into that, I'm also then going to add I've squeezed out the excess liquid out of the cucumber. If there's still a little bit more, you can always put it into a cloth or a muslin to squeeze out any last minute excess. I'm just going to give one more squeeze. And that goes in. My chopped onions. I'm then going to add my garlic. This is about 2 cloves or 1 tablespoon of garlic. And then 2 teaspoons of olive oil. If you were using a yogurt that already contained fat, you wouldn't necessarily need to add any more olive oil. I'm going to give that a good stir. Now, it does take a while for the flavours to develop, particularly the garlic, so it's quite worth sort of making this the day before you're actually going to need it. I've used half a cucumber in this, but obviously you can add more, it's a personal preference. You can also dice your cucumber rather than grating it, and again, it just changes the texture and the appearance of the dip. Now, final bit to add, and do taste test as you go, is a bit of extra flavouring. Now I quite like mine with a little bit of heat, so I put in a few chili flakes, but obviously it's not to everyone's preference. A bit of salt and pepper, a good stir. And again, don't get too carried away with the chili because the flavours will develop over time. Just taste a little bit, see if there's anything else I want to add. That's nice. Sometimes adding a tiny bit of lemon juice or vinegar also works quite well. So I'm going to add literally a teaspoon of vinegar. And then just leave that to one side until you're ready to plate up your dish. Also, this does work well as a dish, so you can use it with nachos and with any crisps. Also works well in fajitas alongside salsa and guacamole. So the final part is plating up. So I've got this nice little tiny square plate. Now I could put 4, 2, I'm just going to do 1 just to show how I plate it up. So I'm going to cheat slightly using a shop-bought salsa. I'm going to put a tiny bit down. Now again, you might want to puree this up more. You might want to put it on a sort of a stencil so you get a specific shape. Now I'm going to take one of my fritters. I like this one, it's a nice round one. Put it there. Tiny bit of my tzatziki. Get some of the green just on top, just so you get a mix of those crunchy flavors from the frying, the tomato brought through from the salsa on the bottom and the tomato in the fritter, and then we've got the slightly spicy cucumber relish, and then possibly a tiny bit of tomato on top, and that would be part of your party food. Now you could do a whole plate of those like a canopy, and you know, people can come and help themselves.